Drive and Documents are probably apps that are most used by your colleagues. So it's only natural that you as an admin also know what the things are that you can manage with those two core apps. Well, good for you, because in this video, we are going to look at what it is that you can do, how you can manage these two core apps, but also we will give some advice on what you should think about specifically as an admin for schools. So do stay tuned. Hello everyone, welcome back to our tutorial series on how to master Google Admin Console. My name is Leon, I work for the company Cloudwise, the creators of the Cool School platform. Here at Cool, we help schools on how they can use IT within education, and within this series, we would like to share our knowledge and experience on how to set up the Google Admin Console with you. Specifically, in this video, we will cover what you can do with Drive and Documents within the Google Admin Console, and specifically what settings you should look out for and think about how you want to set them for your school organization. So let's get started. Now, if you've watched our previous video where I talk about managing the Google apps and specifically also go into the Google Classroom app, which you can find here, then you will know how to get to the core apps. We will go to apps in our dashboard and then we go to Google Workspace. Now in this overview, we see all the core apps and of course we go to Drive and Docs. Now currently this service is on for everyone. We won't talk about that again. Again, I will refer to the previous video I made on how to turn on and turn off services within the Google Admin Console. You see several subjects that we can cover here, and I will go through all of them in this video. There are the sharing settings, migration settings, manage shared drives, transfer of ownership, features and applications, templates, and the activity dashboard settings. Now, if you want to skip ahead to any of these specific topics, check out the description, or you can check the timeline of this video because we will cut it up into chapters. First off, I will go and set the sharing settings. Now the sharing settings also is separated in several parts. So we're going to start with the sharing options. It starts with sharing outside of your own organization, in my case, Cloudwise. We have to select the highest level of sharing outside Cloudwise that you want to allow. Now again, we see here that we can decide on which organizational layer we want to do that. We have several layers here. We can decide, no, we cannot actually share outside of our domain. You can only share with whitelisted domains, or we can turn it on and we can share outside of our domain, but then still we can set a few parameters. Because even if we allow that people can share outside of our domain, we can still set whether or not we want to warn them when they try and share something outside of our domain, which is mainly something like a heads up, like, do you really want to share this outside of your domain? You can simply say yes, and then it will continue and share it. We can also here specify if you want to allow us to send an invitation to non-Google users outside of our domain. So for example, if you share something with an Outlook account or a Microsoft account, while there's not a Google account attached, do you want your colleagues to be able to share with them? We also have the option whether or not we want to allow our users to publish files on the web. A published file is something else than sharing in a sense, because when we publish a file, people cannot copy it, or at least not directly in the same way. A published file is something that is literally publicly accessible as long as people have the link to the file. This can be very useful when you have certain documents that you may want to share with parents, for example, or you want to refer to on your school site. Then we have the access checker. When we share a document, or when we try and send it to someone, or we add it to a calendar meeting, currently it will constantly check with everyone, can this person access the files attached? Can they access the links attached? I find this to be incredibly useful, and I would highly recommend everyone to use this setting, because this will make sure that people that don't think about it beforehand, oh, this person cannot actually access the file, when they click on it. In this case, Google will check it immediately and will ask you, do you want to share it with these people? And will advise you a certain right to be distributed to this person, or maybe a generalized setting to be changed. And then finally, we have distributing content outside of the domain. This has to do with your shared drives. Now, if you are managing your shared drives, this is there to make sure that you can decide who can actually upload things to your shared drives and if they can even access that. In this case, it really is about uploading and moving documents or files within your shared drives. But it's good to know that this is something you can do. We find it is important to keep this in mind. There may be cases where it's important to not allow external people to have access. The shared drive creation settings are important to note. When initially it was implemented, the shared drive functionality, it caused some issues, or at least it was something that we had to deal with as school, because we found that due to the fact that everyone could create shared drives, and that included students, there was a wild growth of all kinds of shared drives within the organization of a school, while the admins and teachers had trouble really maintaining and keeping an overview. So what we can do here is, based on an organizational unit, if I set prevent users, in this case generally, to be able to create a new shared drive, that means that no one, because I'm at the root layer, can create new shared drives. But if I now go to District A, School 1, and then to Students, then I would change this specifically for students. And then students can no longer create a shared drive themselves. However, the other settings are still pretty useful to know about, because if there are certain policies that you as a school have set, then this might benefit you. Preventing the changing of shared drive settings is something that makes sure that you as an admin can set these settings from the top-down layer as an administrator, and no one else, even managers of a Google shared drive, can change them at a later time. We can prevent people from outside the organization to access files within the shared drive. This can be very useful when you have private documents, when you really have at least one shared drive that you really do not want external people to access. Again, this is something you have to really look at on a case-by-case basis, because there can be certain shared drives that you still want to organize all kinds of documents in, because you want to collect them in a centralized location. And then in that case, you do want them to be able to access those files. So you really have to think about when to use that. Preventing non-members from accessing files in the shared drive is essentially, do I want people to allow access to individual files or folders if they are shared with people who are not members of the shared drive? I would highly recommend just keeping this as it is to allow this, because there can be cases that you just want people to have access to one single file within the shared drive. And when we prevent this, then suddenly we would either have to choose, we give them full access to everything within the shared drive, or they can't access it, or maybe you need to create a copy of that file, put it somewhere else. It's just a lot more hassle. So trust me, this is a lot better. And then finally, do we allow commenters and viewers from downloading, copying, and printing files within shared drives? If you have certain documents that you do not want people to replicate, then this is really something that you would want. Just a place where people can look at them, can add comments, but they are not allowed to download those files, copy it, or print it in any way. Then finally, we have target audiences. This is something that is only available to you if you have the Google Workspace for Education Plus license. But what we essentially can do here is set aliases in a way. It is a way to make it very easy for you to say, I want to share with everyone in Cloudwise. Then you just have the audience Cloudwise and everyone is added to that. But in the same way, we could create a target audience for all students, or a target audience for all employees, etc. And finally, we have link sharing. And this is one that is important to look out for, because of course we want to allow link sharing. Link sharing is very useful. It makes sure that if we allow link sharing, that people can share a document without knowing beforehand what the email address is of the people that need access to our file. But that's not what this setting is about. No, this setting, as its description says, in small text, select the default link sharing settings for a newly created file. Now this is something that can be very confusing and can actually create a data breach. What do I mean with that? So let's look at this. By default it's off. I would recommend doing that unless you have a good reason not to. Why? Every single newly created file will have by default a sharing with your colleagues, with people that are within your target audience. By default, if you don't have the target audiences available because you don't have the proper license, then this will be set to everyone within your domain, as if you would have done the shared link setting that everyone within your domain has access to view your document, for example, or that we just say everyone within our entire domain can access and view and search for our file. Now you can imagine that there are many cases where you really do not want this. You do not want people to, without you knowing about it, having access to all your files, because if you are a director or maybe you do HR, you do salary administration, it's incredibly important to keep certain documents private, to keep them secure. There are only a few situations where this would be turned on. Funnily enough, there are certain situations with special education that I have found where the school really does not want students to be able to create private documents. Now, in this case, you could say we go to the specific school, to the students, and we say, no, by default, it is always shared with our school. It's always shared with everyone. Again, this is not practical per se, because then even other students can access these files. But if you would have the target audience set, for example, we can say by default we want it to be able to be shared with the teachers. So the teachers would be able to see that a student has created a new file and can search for it and see what they have made without them having to share it initially with the teacher. As always, if you've made any changes, click the save button, or else you'll have to do this all over again. Now, luckily, that was by far the biggest subject of all the topics in this list. Migration settings is a very simple one. If we use shared drives, then by default, only an admin or the owner of a document can move files into a shared drive. If you are starting to use shared drives, you're organizing it, you are creating Google shared drives for certain groups within your organization, then maybe it's a lot easier to actually allow at least users from a specific organizational unit to migrate documents that they have at least edit rights to. That makes it a lot easier and makes it so that you don't have to be the one to manage all these documents and has to migrate all of them into the shared drive. Then managing shared drives. And this is one of the main reasons why I would want a school to use shared drives instead of private My Drive folders and files that maybe they have already set up in a very good and structured way, but you as an admin have a lot better tools to share and manage any of the things that are done within a shared drive without having to grant you direct access to any of the contents. For example, a workplace where the school leaders put certain private, confidential files, that is still something that usually causes friction when you as an admin can actually access those. Now with this, the great thing is that we can see the several shared drives that are created within our organization. We can see who created them, when they were created, if they are still active, and I can manage the members directly. So if there is someone who should have access to this specific shared drive, they don't have that yet, I can do it from here without having to be added as a manager directly in the shared drive itself. I can just add a user, I can set the level of access they need, and it works the same as if I had done this within the shared drive itself. If I go to settings, I can just say I want to change all of these settings that normally I would do as a manager within the shared drive. Again, this is really great because I don't have to actually be a manager of the shared drive. And even if someone locks themselves out of a shared drive because they remove themselves, the shared drive will persist. But then in this way, you can at least still make sure that you can change all of these settings or add new users to access it. Finally, we have restore. Now, if we go to restore, so every shared drive has their own recycle bin, essentially. And the moment you remove something, it first be put there. If you remove it there again, or you wait for a period of time, by default that's 30 days, then you will permanently have deleted it. If you delete it permanently and you want to rectify that, you will have 25 days to do so. But then we have to set the start and the end date of the period where we have actually permanently removed the data. And then we can restore that. If there is something that really was lost before that, or there has too much time that has passed, then you should really look at other solutions like Vault or any other forms of restoring and backup. Then we only have a few more left. The transfer of ownership. This is essentially the same thing you do when you remove a user, when you permanently delete a user. You get the option to transfer files that they own to someone else. In this case, we can do it before we remove them so that you maybe can check beforehand if the right files are actually transferred to the new user. This can also be used when, for example, you had a user with two accounts which they want to merge. Then this can be used to make sure that all files are immediately transferred, the ownership, to the new account that will be the primary account they continue using. Then features and applications. This has to do with certain options that you allow your users to use when using Drive and documents. For example, do you allow users to also have their files stored offline? Now, personally, I usually think that's very useful. You don't know what happens. Maybe they are away somewhere where they have very bad reception, but maybe you don't want any files to be stored locally. Then you can turn this off, obviously. Smart Compose, Google Drive for Desktop. Many of these things have to do with just usability, how easy it is for your users to use these apps. But with Google Drive for Desktop and making use of backup and sync, there are things to think about. The reason for it is that there are certain vulnerabilities to using those applications locally on your device. Because when we use the Drive Backup and Sync, for example, or the Google Drive for Desktop, it will mean that certain files will be stored locally. This doesn't have to be a problem, but it is a vulnerability, and it's simply good to underline that fact. The rest also is not very important to really make a choice on, but for example, allowing people to install add-ons themselves or not can actually be a very important one. Add-ons are third-party software, and although add-ons can add a lot of functionality to your Google Apps, which I use a lot from, maybe you don't want certain users to be able to install them themselves. And finally, maybe a funny one, do we allow our users to create new files within Drive? Why would you want to do that? Well, there actually are some cases where you don't want certain users to be able to create new files. Again, there was a certain situation where I was asked, how can we make sure that we keep complete track of what our students are doing, and that they can only access the things that we want them to access? Then, for example, you don't want students to be able to create doc sheets, slides, drawings, or form files, but instead within Google Classroom, you create a new template, a new document for every student for an assignment, and that way create documents for them to work in. Then, templates. Now, templates is also pretty simple. Now, the idea with templates is that we go to a Google app like Docs or Forms or Slides or Sheets, and we say, okay, I want to create a document, but we could also do that based on a template. Google already has certain templates available for you to pick and choose from, but maybe you want to add custom templates for your organization. Now, if we do that, we can set the several categories that we want to use or want to have visible for our organization. We can edit these, we can create one ourselves if we want to, but we can also see who is allowed to add or edit any of the templates. In this case, anyone within the organization can submit templates to the template gallery. We can also set it to moderated. Anyone in your organization can submit templates, but an admin with the Google Docs templates privilege must approve them before they appear in your organizational template gallery. Or restricted, only admins can actually submit templates to the gallery. Within a school, please change this. If you are an admin of a school, don't make it open to anyone. Please set it to moderated. Why? It's very simple. Students can send in new templates. These templates will be visible for everyone. Another thing to keep in mind, in that sense with templates is that a template created within the same Google Workspace environment that also houses your students will be visible for them too. This is not something that can be restricted, so please bear that in mind. But templates can be very useful to make sure that you have a certain basis to work from with your logos and text that you want to add to any file. And then finally, the activity dashboard settings. The activity dashboard is a relatively new functionality within Google Documents. It allows you to see what users have recently opened and viewed the document, how often was it opened, at what times. And some organizations may want to decide to not use this functionality at all, which means that we have to turn this off, making sure that it is not visible who can see individual user views. In this case, it's turned on, or it can turn on only with users in our own organization. We can see within those documents that we have created who access them, or we turn it off completely. The same goes for access to view history. Do we want to change this? Currently, it's set to on. Users within our organization can access the viewers in viewer trend in activity dashboard, essentially showing a timeline of when there were people accessing the file and how often that happened. This is a more anonymized setting, an anonymized view, while this more directly shows which people have acted and accessed the document. It's important to note, of course, that even if we turn this off, there's still the revision history. So we can still go and look at all the changes that have been made in the document, if that is something that interests us, and can give us some idea of when people worked in the document. But if we want to see when someone actually accessed the file, then this is the setting that we have to keep turned on. Rarely I have found that schools really make an issue of this point. However, it's good to know that this is something that you can turn off for driving documents, making sure that it becomes anonymized when people have accessed a certain file. With that, we went through every single topic and setting that we can change within Google Drive and Documents from the admin console. So you know now how you can change the sharing settings or the default sharing settings for your organization. You also know when you want to change certain things in that regard. You know how to deal with shared drives if you want people to create them, and also how you can manage them even if you're not a member as an admin of that specific shared drive. A few small things we covered, like transferring data, how we can decide whether or not people can migrate data, even if they're not a owner of a file or an admin, and of course, how we can deal with the activity dashboard and if we want to change anything about that. Also, we went over a few features and options we can change on how in the specific apps they work. If you can use the Drive app for desktop, and if you can change any file to be available offline. I really hope you liked this video and it gave you a quick overview of all the settings you can do for Google Drive in Documents, and it gave you an idea of what you should know as an admin when managing these core apps. If you liked the video, do let us know by liking it and subscribing to our channel. We try and put out videos every week, so if you want to not miss any of our uploads, also make sure that besides subscribing, you turn on notifications. As I just said, we try and upload a new video every week, so stay tuned for more short how-to videos on how to manage the Google Admin Console. Again, thanks for watching. My name is Leon, and I'll see you in the next video.